It's
Welcome.
a webinar, not a Zoom call. So that's good. Okay.
Right.
So welcome everybody then who's joining us. We are at the outset. Let me just say, first of all, welcome to Jane, and I'll let her introduce herself. But
Yeah.
I was explaining to Jane, and those of you who are just arriving, that I have people working on our kitchen on our refrigerator. So there may be a point at which I actually have to step away for a second, which is unusual, but it's life of working at home and having certain distractions that you can't always account for in these days. So again, welcome, Jane. Thanks for being back on Coffee with Kim this year. Good to see you, and fun catching up about your adventures traveling around the country this year. So, but let me turn it over to you and have you introduce yourself, and then we'll get into talking about gap years.
Sounds great. Good morning and welcome everyone. And thanks so much for having me back for Coffee with Kim. I'm Jane Sarouhan, and I am a co-founder of J2 Guides. The other J of the J2 is my husband and partner, Jason. So Jason and I have been lifelong experiential educators. And I throw that word out as if everyone could just assume what it means. But, you know, it means we have been working in a variety of fields with high school, gap year, and college age students for about 25 years, guiding them through international travel programs, community service programs, wilderness programs, helping them to extend that learning environment outside of the classroom, hence experiential. And J2 Guides specifically focuses on gap year advising or coaching or counseling or consulting, whatever you want to call it. Really, I often equate what I do to a great college counselor. My job and my passion is to bond with a student, connect with a family, understand the scope of what we're looking at, from goals to abilities to budget. And the other part of my job is to be out all over the country and all over the world, vetting quality gap year programs. And again, like a great college counselor, helping to create a curated list of reputable options that really align with a family's criteria. So that was sort of the brief snapshot of the overall. I've just been involved in this field for a very long time. And presently, and sort of the pinnacle of career is running J2 Guides with Jason. So happy to be here and answer questions for people, because I know there's so much buzz about gap year this year.
There indeed there is. And let me say to our participants, our guests, that if you have a question, please either raise your hand or drop it in the chat or the Q&A, and I'll be sure, if Jane doesn't see it, I'll read it aloud so we can get to that. Because that's why we're here, is to answer those questions that are out there about gap years. And so let's dive into that a little bit. Like, you know, you've been out visiting people all over the country right now. And so I'm just curious, first of all, what have students been able to do in light of COVID? And, you know, while we see light, hopefully at the end of that tunnel, I think there's still some fear around what will even next year look like in regard to that. But so tell me what the kiddos
Yeah, COVID and gap year. I mean, that's the question of the hour and every minute of the day. COVID and fill in the blank, right? Well, it's actually very exciting to be able to report that the gap year is thriving. So Jason and I decided that this would be a really productive and profound year to travel the country to spotlight the American gap year. We saw the writing on the wall last March. We were like, school is not going back this year. Maybe it's not, meaning last spring for our own daughter, maybe not even this year coming. What can we do to keep our family healthy and sane, and also keep promoting the value of gap time? So as Kim suggested, we have been traveling throughout the US. We do have sort of a modified Sprinter converted camper van. So we can live and travel safely in a pod. And we are in and out of, you know, hotels and things like that from time to time. But we've been using our time to visit students and programs all over the country. Now, there are students overseas, it's worth saying, but we really want to kick off, or kind of finish 2020, I should say, kick off this academic year with a real deep inquiry into what programs could do. And it's really quite tremendous. I mean, if we just start to look at some of the basics, a lot of gap year programs have group sizes of anywhere from 10 to 16. So we're not talking about college campuses with thousands of students moving freely. You know, these are small pods that you can pod together, quarantine, mask, distance for 7, 10, 12, 14 days, and all of a sudden you're a family unit. And so that happened for students across the country. So there was the potting ability. The second, with experiential education, to come back to that phrase, it's learning by doing. It's not sitting in the four walls of a classroom. So now we're also looking at environments that, wherever you stand with your sort of risk assessment with COVID, I think we all agree that being outdoors feels safest and feels most comfortable. It's certainly what's been endorsed by, organizations like the CDC. So experiential ed, kids are out on farms learning about climate change from farmers, or they are walking in rural communities learning about art activism, learning about, wilderness skills, team building. So are they going to fine arts school in Florence, Italy? Not as much of that this year, but were they able to do deep dives into amazing areas of inquiry, potted with a group of people, with inspiring instructors and role models? 100%. I could go on and on, but I'll pause there. But so, because maybe you have more questions, Kim, but I do also just want to say it was so striking to us. It has been seeing students. There's even students on gap years are generally pretty lit up, right? They're pretty excited and alive. But the students we've seen so far this year, it's like that times 10. They are the happiest people across the platform, across the country, than we've seen in our own families, in our own adult friend communities. These are kids who are like living with people, having contact, feeling stimulated. They feel like they have more agency. And they are not taking their gap years for granted. So there's a deep sense of gratitude and appreciation for these opportunities. And it's really quite something to see.
Sure, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've been impressed, I follow you on social media, and just the stories that you all have been able to share about the students. And I think that, hopefully for some of them, maybe they're so lit up because it's so enriching knowing
Yeah.
that the college experience would not have been
Absolutely.
the
Yep.
same had they started this year. So
Absolutely. And
go
yeah.
ahead. Yeah.
I was just going to say, Kim, and I don't know if you got a lot of these calls yourself, but we also got a huge wave of calls throughout the fall and over Christmas break of college students who really gave it their best shot at virtual learning and came home,
Right,
finished
right.
the semester, and were like, well, I can't do that. So a lot of college students that we've been working with for the second half of this year as well, who
Sure.
really gave virtual learning a shot and felt like I can't do this anymore.
Right,
So
right.
yeah.
I agree. And now what I'm seeing is a group of kids, seniors in high school, who are so burnt out by the virtual learning they've had to do since last March in
Oh
most
yeah.
cases, that they're really thinking now about gap years as well,
Yeah.
because I just need a break. Even if school returns to somewhat normal on-campus learning in the fall, I think the burnout factor is so real right now for lots of us in terms of just the virtual world. But the students I'm seeing a big toll on them for
Yeah.
sure. So
Yeah.
so that kind of ties into one of my questions is, what have you seen in terms of numbers around
Mm.
gap years? Are you seeing those big increases that we're hearing about in the media? And, that's part of what's scaring other people on the other side of the college equation is, now all these people took a gap year, now they're all coming back. Are there fewer spaces for my students? So what's sort of your take on that part of it?
It's so interesting. I mean, I think there was so much speculation about everything
Mhm.
last spring. And so the big hype last spring was schools are not going to grant all the requests for deferrals we're going to get. It's just not going to, we saw none of that. There was we were talking to our friend and colleague, Ethan Knight, who's the founder of Gap Year Association. I'll drop a link before we end the call in the chat box around that, because it's a great resource of data. The 300, 400% increase. I'm looking over at my partner, Jason, in gap year inquiry and pursuit.
Okay.
So that's pretty remarkable. Right now, it's like 1%, less than 1% is the national average of gappers. Now, there's still thousands of kids gappers. We just live in a really big country,
Sure, sure.
to kids who are, college or military or otherwise bound. So a 300 to 400%, can't quite remember exactly, increase. So that's significant.
Yeah.
Um, and yes, and I would say for us, typically the number one reason that students are pursuing gap year is academic burnout, and that's been confirmed by surveys, national surveys. this year that immediately was rivaled by COVID-19. So half of our families this year are pursuing gap years because of COVID who would not have otherwise considered taking a gap year. So it brought a very new population to the conversation. Yeah.
Sure, sure. Yeah. And
In terms of, what, I mean, I'd be curious for you to help shed some light on what the college landscape looks like because, so again, everyone who requested a deferral, right? So,
Mhm.
and we really encourage this for our students as well. You apply to college, receive an acceptance, request to defer it for a year. Everyone was granted. So that big speculation last spring was moot. There is, of course, much big question and concern once again, like, okay, so now we have all those kids who deferred. They all want to go. Are there enough spaces? Will it make it a more competitive environment for my current senior?
Right.
And will we see a difference in deferrals? Will that sort of resurrect that question? I'm curious if
Sure,
if
sure.
you have insight into that.
And I think part of the equation is just complicated this year with I mean, colleges, many colleges have seen huge spikes in application numbers in general. I think lots of students hedging their bets, applying to a lot of places, trying to make sure they have a place
And it
in some cases.
and also influenced by the test optional.
Correct. Yep,
Yes, right.
absolutely. So yes, without, now if I am not a great tester, I'm also perhaps now emboldened to apply to some places that otherwise I wouldn't be if I had to submit a test score. So yes, that's an increase as well. And then adding in the gappers coming back. I do think there is going to be the numbers and the statistics over the next couple of years are going to shift some. It is going to look more competitive. But the good news is, the silver lining is, there are actually still a whole bunch of really awesome, especially small liberal arts colleges that aren't experiencing these gigantic leaps in numbers and have spaces for students and are admitting them at high rates. I think that, the other part is, and my good friend, if you know me long enough, you'll hear me talk about Rick Clark at Georgia Tech a lot because we've been friends for a lot of years, and he's really a good thought leader in our industry. And his take on it from a public institution perspective is like, size matters for them too. A bigger school like his can afford to take on an extra 300 kids. So if that's the gappers, for example, who come back, it's not going to mess them up that much. A small place like a Davidson College, where literally you want every student in a bed on campus, that they've got to pay closer attention to the
Right.
numbers because it is more
Yeah.
critical for them. But
Right.
I think that there will be some impact of it, but there are too many other factors that are impacting college admissions this year
Yeah.
that
Right.
are coming into this. So
Yeah. Yeah.
um, well, Jane, how about you tell us, like, you all have such a great approach, I feel like, to helping students identify what they can do for a gap year. And I loved your story and how you shared that last time on our call. And so if you could kind of walk us through that approach and that philosophy, I think that's really helpful for families to hear.
Great. Yeah, I mean, I think out the gate, when anyone is starting, whether it's the parent or the student starting to bring this to the conversation, it usually evokes some fear of the unknown. This isn't familiar. This isn't what we do. This isn't what people do. So fear starts to kind of encroach on the process before it's even begun, which I think is a shame. And we want to try and remove that if possible, because actually this is a really exciting opportunity. And anecdotally, having done this work or a variety of roles in this field for 25 years, and for the data to support it, all points lead to the fact that gap years are emerging a more engaged young adult. They are outperforming their peers in college. And that's the link I'm gonna put in the chat box later. They're getting higher GPAs in college. They are graduating in closer to 4 years. There's only been really one big national study around this. Information and data is getting sort of brought back up to date, but all again data points, and it's completely confirmed by the stories I've seen and witnessed. My own students that I led 25 years ago, who are grown-ups themselves and very successful adults, that even though this path feels non-traditional, unconventional, call it what you will, it doesn't derail students from the ultimate academic path that they will go on, or their career path. In fact, students self-report much higher levels of happiness, self-satisfaction, and greater success in college and beyond. So I just want families to give themselves permission again, whoever brings the idea to the table, like, take a breath, it's okay. Let's just have the conversation before we let it get, I don't have the money, we can't afford it. What's this going to mean? Your parents won't agree. We'll get there. So, I always tell families it's great for families who are juniors right now, seniors, it's not too late by any means. But as the college conversation's happening, just keep a little sliver of that dining room table open to put your gap year conversation, the gap year portfolio, not just the college brochures. I'll break it down to like 2 or 3 steps to keep it as a start fairly simple. So, first, there's that. Then there's doing a dive as a family into something I call what is your why? And that is the process of examining, okay, so gap year's on the table. Why? Why is this something we're talking about? Um, and there are, 6, 7, 8 popular reasons we often hear. COVID-19, as I mentioned, is tied for first with academic burnout. Burnout typically holds first place on that one. And every parent and student can usually nod in agreement. Mental, physical health is way up there. As we all know, it is no secret. The genie's out of the bottle. Mental health is a real issue for these young adults, and they are emerging from high school with really unprecedented cases of anxiety and depression. And that's not necessarily a great recipe for success heading on to 4 more or who knows how many more years of higher education. Let's make this a year of health and wellness. But I group health, mental and physical, because we work with a lot of students who are also athletes. A lot of students who've injured themselves through sports, lots of concussions. And screen time is just the worst possible antidote to try to get back to a place of recovery. So mental and physical health. Some students are coming to gap year because they're not happy with their college acceptance, although I'll say that's probably the smallest number or reason, but certainly a valid one. Many students report, I think I'm on 5 here, a lack of readiness for college. This is one a lot of parents relate to. My child, I don't think they're mature enough or confident enough. I'm not sure they're going to get out of bed and get themselves to class. I'm still doing the laundry. So just a year of growth in maturity and confidence. And I'll end at this one, but I'd say for sort of my 6th reason for what is your why.
Uh-oh, Jane, we lost your audio. Oh. No, can't hear you yet. Technical difficulties. Huh,
How am I now?
there I can hear you. Huh.
Okay. Well, we'll go back. It could have been my earrings could have hit a mute on my
Sure,
headset.
yeah.
That's what you get for being a big earring wearer. Sorry about that. So the last reason really being that just a hunger and curiosity. Students have a great college acceptance. They feel mature and ready. They want to get to know themselves, see the world, try on some other areas of interest, leave the bubble of their home. So what is your why is an opportunity for student or parent or both to come forth and make that list? Why are we talking about this? I always look students in the eye and say, there's no wrong answer. There is no shame here. There is no wrong answer. And in fact, you may identify with every single answer I just offered. But starting with that means it's not just a lot of parents say, I don't want to fund a glorified vacation. I don't want this to be, of course not, nor do we. Jason and I talk a lot about planning an intentional gap year. So if we really want to create an intentional gap year, then we want to set the intention. Well, what's my goal here? My goal is to really address my mental health. My goal here is really to get some life experience, to get fluency in Spanish, or maybe get exposure to my possible career path. I'm interested in engineering, but actually I don't know any real world application. So we start with this, right? The free kind of exploration of the motivations. That's step 1. The second step is to do a brainstorm. And this is where I encourage students to really charge this part on their own with pen and paper, not a phone or computer. Um, and just a free write again, and this is a really good place to leave anxieties and concerns and self-judgment and limitations at the door. If I could do anything on my gap year, what would it be? So we've set the intention of what is your why, and then it's a brainstorm. I'd go surfing in Spain. I'd study art in Italy. I want to road trip cross country with my best friend. I want to build homes for the homeless. I want to work with wildlife, and I want to work with kids. I want to travel. I want to gain fluency in a second language, or and I just encourage students just just get it all out and don't hold back. There will be many, many things on that list that do not happen.
Mhm.
But I don't want to stop students from writing it down because I think it shows, particularly someone like me, and Kim, I'm sure you can relate, by being an outsider of the family, I don't know the things that make you happy. I don't know the things that make you interested. And even if you're not going to surf in Spain for the entire gap year, what if you did do a business internship in Spain? And that's something that parents are like, I love that, and can get their match. Why wouldn't we maybe add on a week or two at the end of that internship and see if we can fit that surfing in? So don't worry if you see things on that list, parents, that are not going to be part of the fundamental gap year you want to support. But if we give students permission to write it down, maybe there's going to be a way to filter it in somewhere.
Mhm.
And that leads to my last suggestion. So there's the what is your why, there's exploring this massive brainstorm, and then there's honing it into a few anchors. Anchors is a term that Jason and I talk about with our students, where you're going to take your top 2 or 3 goals. That's really what the anchors are. And that's what we're going to build the year around. So you look at this big list. And you post it somewhere in the bathroom or on a fridge, you walk by it, and just like any list, they're just things that seem to pop out every time you walk by. Those are the things we want to pay attention to. You circle them, star them, arrows, cross off the others, and almost without fail, in this process, students come down to identifying 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 primary goals, and almost without fail, they are goals that parents can wrap their minds around. And so that then has taken us from establishing our intention, doing a full extensive brainstorm, and honing in on a few goals that we might want to start to build a productive gap year around. So those are some first, really, you don't need to know anything about gap year to just begin those steps and immediately be like, okay, now we know we want to start to look at these kinds of things.
Mhm.
I'll pause there. I have so much more I could add, but let me pause there and see if you have questions or directions you want me to go in, Kim.
Sure. I can always follow up with questions. Audience, do you have any that you'd want us
Yes.
to address at this point in the conversation? Um, I think so. I think one of the questions, and you sort of started touching on it a little bit, that or concern, I guess, that I'll hear from families. Not only is it the I'm not funding this, global vacation for a year, but also then on the flip side of that is I can't afford a
Fun it
global.
at all.
So, like, where
Let's
do
talk
you
about that.
yeah, let's talk about
Yeah, talk about
affordability.
money.
Yeah, let's do
So
that.
after these first 3 steps, the next question is, all right, let's talk about a budget. And again, I intentionally have left it as the 4th step because I just, again, want to give families permission to really go down this path. If you're here on this call, there's something here that's intriguing. There's a reason why you think this could serve your child. So um, I could talk about budget. I mean, I've given workshops on budgets entirely. So this is a big topic. A few things. A great gap year is not going to cost the same as a year of college. Let's be really clear. Families don't always know that. Jason and I work with families with anywhere from $1,000, $500, largely students who are funding the gap year on their own, and up to families who've probably spent upwards of $25,000 to $30,000. So big range there, and you could spend more if you wanted to, but $25,000, $30,000 would afford you a very robust gap year, as would 500 to 1,000. So establishing your budget is that 4th item. We've done the what is your why, you've done the brainstorm, you've honed in on a few goals, and now we sit down and have a really honest conversation as a family, and I love students being a part of it. This is what we could do. What can you, student, bring to the table? A few things to say about budget in this moment. One, many gap year programs, so there's a lot of opportunities out there, but organized gap year programs, many of them have affiliations with universities, which makes their programs available to be it opens up you to use your 529 fund. So if you have been working hard and putting money away in a 529 for your child's educational future, many of these programs you could pay for part or all of the tuition from your 529. That's a great thing that not everybody knows. Most people do tend to overfund their 529s. So that's one piece. Secondly, many programs of the same nature, so they are the more expensive programs, let's say, do offer financial aid and scholarships. So that's always worth pursuing and exploring. The third piece I want to mention is that not every experience has to cost a lot of money. So in a typical gap year, And let's be clear, gap time could be a semester for you. I kind of jumped right over even defining what a gap year is, but we talk about it as a year. But maybe for you, it's a meaningful semester. Maybe it's a summer. I have 3 or 4 Middlebury students this year, and they were all, Middlebury does a big push around, is it January, Feb admits?
Yeah.
And so they just had the fall semester. Well, guess what? They were halfway through their fall semester and like, this gap year thing is fantastic. I'm actually going to request a deferral for the rest of the year, which is what they all did. So that often happens, but maybe you have a semester. So there's no defined amount of time of what there's no definition in a gap year that says you must take a year, but I'm going to work in that phraseology. Okay. So in a gap year of a year, and we're looking at the academic year, most students are really attached to their summers at home. I can see the Q&A lighting up, but I'm going to just finish this thought and then, yeah. And so in a 9-month academic year, if that was your gap year, many of our families will actually break their year up into 2 or 3 parts. There are a handful of year-long programs, but more predominantly there are semester and shorter. So when we go back where I was suggesting that you locate 2 or 3 or 4 primary goals, you can see if we break the year up into part, we could actually pursue each one. You could think about the year as like trimesters. So there's that. How this relates to budget. It's often the case that students will really spend a good amount of money on their first experience, a fall program, something more structured, more robust in content, in support and scaffolding. And that will cost more. The more scaffolding, the more support, the more expense. From that foundational experience, many students feel equipped to move on to increasingly more independent experiences. And when we get more independent, we strip away the scaffolding, the price tag also goes down. So it's very often the case that your budget will take a big hit in the fall. And that could be okay if it's just this kind of perfect cherry-picked program for your child. And then we start getting really scrappy, really. And students come home for the winter and work for a few months. They come home and it's spring, a great time to maybe travel, do a road trip with a friend or backpack in Europe, and take on more independent experiences that can cost very, very little. So it's just so many creative strategies. The last piece I want to say about budgeting, and I'll pause and catch your breath, is Jason and I do a ton of work. Actually, I have 2 things I could say around this thing. We talk to our students about resource mapping. So again, pen and paper, we get them to take it out and say, let's brainstorm your network. Networking this is a life skill here. Who do you know? Where do they live? What do they do? And a lot of our students did this year because housing becomes one of the most expensive parts of a gap year. I want to live in London, Sydney, or New York. I'm like, okay. Do you have someone to live with? Because housing is going to be the biggest expense. If you want to volunteer or intern, those aren't going to cost anything. So, yeah, actually, I've got an uncle in Nashville. I've got an aunt in the film business in LA. My mom's best friend from college lives in London. They need a nanny. All of a sudden, the light bulbs start going off. So if we start to leverage your network, either in the content of the work that your child is interested in, or just looking for a place to sleep for a month or a week, that could really open up possibilities and drastically reduce costs and actually build really special bonds for your child with an extended family member or a dear old friend or relative, etc. So I can't express enough the value of exploring even something like that. And I think that's also teaching students life skills on how to network in their community. And that's what we all know. The best things are still happening, whether you find your life partner or your vocation. It's really networking. So I'll pause there around sort of some of the budgeting strategies. I hope that's helpful.
That is helpful. And so, there's 2 different questions. Let's actually maybe start with the second one because it relates to the budget, and it's, how do I find gap year experiences covered by the 529? Are there only specific ones that is able to be used toward, or maybe you can explain that a little bit to us?
Yeah. And I'm sorry if you just lost my picture for a sec. I'm going to just come up with a quick link to pop back into our chat box. So great questions. Thank you. It's looking quite a bit. And do I have the ability, panelists and attendees? Here we go. I'm in the chat. I don't know if, so that was the link I had ready. So Gap Year Association is an organization I mentioned. I just posted this to some students that I presented to recently. That link goes directly to the research that talks about the data and how students are performing so well. But if you back it out and go to the homepage for Gap Year Association, you'll find loads of links, including accredited programs and accredited counselors. Jason and I are 2 of the 8 accredited counselors in our country. There are only 8, but there are dozens of accredited programs, and many of those accredited programs do accept 529s. I would start with that list.
Okay,
I'll start with that.
that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, that makes sense. That seems like a great resource to get started with. And so the next question is less about budget. So anything else around budget that you feel like we should touch on before we move on to more of the sort of the nuts and bolts of putting together here?
I will mention, just because it's happening, I just launched it today or last night, Jason and I did, but I'm going to put this in. I hope I did the right link, but Jason and I are huge proponents of access. And so we last year gave away $10,000 in scholarships to our own services. So we do a monthly or just sort of holiday. We find ways to raffle. We just posted a raffle where one student will be selected at random. There's the Instagram link. And that will give you a spot in our training. We do a gap year planning training. We run it monthly. We teach it live. And it goes into depth on this goal setting and budgeting, et cetera. And it's just a great opportunity for someone who's doesn't even need to be 100% sure about the gap year. But that's just one thing I wanted to mention there. But I think in terms of the funding, starting with those steps, looking for those that take 529. I guess the other piece I'd say is, particularly for seniors and parents of seniors, I know, having 4 adult nieces and nephews, that, when I asked my brothers way back when as a young, I didn't know what I was doing. What do the kids want? Let me get them some like meaningful books for their high school graduation. They're like, no, the kids just want money. I'm like, oh, that's really, forget Aunt Jane and Uncle Jason's creative gift giving and all these meaningful books around solo travel and standing on the precipice of adulthood. No, they want money. And so I'll just say that I think this is a place where students can also help make that appeal and say, I'm thinking about taking a gap year, and I know you all love me and support me. And we've seen students collect, honestly, hundreds of dollars, if not more, instead of in lieu of graduation gifts. I don't need a gift card to Barnes and Noble. If you want to contribute to my gap year fund, that would really be wonderful. And sometimes that can come in the gift of frequent flyer miles or a gift card to REI or EMS, so a student could get that backpack. There's a lot of ways to leverage, again, kind of the immediate impending graduation and things like that. And that's sort of crowdfunding. I would leave it at that for now, I think, with funding. Yeah.
Great. So then the other question is really more centered around sort of the whole, how does it work? So do you apply and get accepted, then ask for a gap year? So that was sort of the deferral part that you were talking about. Maybe go into that a little bit more. And I can certainly add what I know from the college side of things in terms of that. And then the second part of it is what happens if during the gap year you decide you don't want to go to college? And how often does that part actually happen? Because my impression is that part is actually rare.
Never happen. It's amazing. And I completely appreciate the concern and question. It's valid, and I hear it 100 times a day. I think in an ideal world, I'm pretty sure Kim and I are going to be 100% agreement on this. In an ideal world, a student's going to apply to college during their senior year. There's momentum, there's support. And it also allows you to really enjoy your gap year and know what's waiting for you. So across the board, that's generally my recommendation. Now, if a family comes and says, my child is like, went through a major trauma this year, grades really weren't great, like the whole point of taking the gap year is because I can't get them to do this college process, well then, okay, that's what we're going to work with. But if you have kind of a fairly typically bound college student, let's apply to college, get your acceptances, request that deferral. Then the question I often get is, what if my child makes a 180 on the colleges they want to go to and that's not the college they want anymore? That actually also happens really infrequently. Students aren't going to go in a gap year and become an entirely different person. They're just going to become more of who they are. it is possible that there could be some subtle shifts. Like I chose that school because I thought I wanted environmental science, but then I did this like environmental science internship in South Africa and realized it's not at all what I want. But chances are they also chose that school because of the community and the student teacher ratio and the location. And so we just don't see a massive change in what students are wanting, that they come back either again not wanting college or wanting a different college. So the best case scenario is you apply, you defer, you dive into the gap year, and come home at the end of that period of time and begin your university experience.
Mhm.
Did I cover the aspects of that? And what would you add, Kim?
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And, for years of working in schools and now working independently, that was always the same advice. Do the college process, like you said, and in the rare cases when someone has just shut down so completely that they just can't. And that has happened to me once or twice in my
Right.
25-year career.
Yeah.
And they just needed the gap year for other reasons, mental health primarily. And but we've always done the process of searching for and applying to colleges. And in fact, it was just last year actually, I had a gapper come back for a year from a year off and called me and said, I don't think I want to go to the school that's waiting for me. We spent a few hours over the course of a few weeks working on a new list of ideas, thinking through it. She still ultimately ended up back at what was waiting for her. And I think you're right. She didn't change completely. She just changed some things that she wanted to focus on. And once we really also dug in more about where she was headed, and I said, hey, listen, here's what you can actually do at College of Charleston. She was like, oh, well, you're right. And so that's where she is. And it has turned out to be, it's still the place she wanted to be. And so you're right. I think sometimes it's that, they're questioning themselves, but they just have to kind of, in this case, she really had to kind of think it out loud. And we had to go through some exercises to kind of circle back to, no, this is still the best choice for you.
Yeah.
And then one other time, my last year working at Providence Day, actually, we had a student who took a gap year, did come back and applied to new places.
Yeah.
And in her case was actually then admitted to some schools that she was not admitted to initially. I think the gap year in her case really did make her now a more interesting candidate.
Yes.
And so that worked in her favor. Honestly.
Absolutely. And we don't, and there are families again coming to reapply, and we don't want them to bank on the gap year boosting that college resume, but it certainly isn't going to hurt.
Right.
Yeah, so we've seen that as well. And for those families who just, again, it's just not happening this year. Or one thing I see is, the junior year wasn't a great year, and the senior year, the students are just crushing it, but they didn't get to really showcase their senior year. Those students, we might front load their gap year, the summer or the fall, with that first big experience and get them home as soon as possible to apply or reapply in the late fall and get back on that track and then get back out there on their gap year. So there are a lot of ways to get creative and strategic to, again, support that end goal. And it goes back to kind of part of the what is your why. Like, let's understand what we're looking. Well, I want to really reapply to school. Okay, so then we know that's part of the formula.
Right. And
Yeah.
once you factor that in, you can certainly plan around it, like you're saying. And I think the other part of that question to touch on is the whole process of asking for a deferral, which you were touching on earlier. And I have to agree with you, like very rarely have I seen a school say no to a student.
Right.
And a lot of them it's a way for them to manage their enrollments in some cases too. Like some of them were very glad to send a few of you freshmen off to do something else, because we know we're almost at capacity and we can't take the space is getting tight. And
Right.
that helps me, think ahead to next year already. Then I've got, 10 or 15 kids in the pipeline. Like there are lots of reasons that colleges also think it's a good idea, and they want students who are mature and excited to learn. And we really see that this experience in a gap year often revs up that exact thing that colleges are looking for, that mojo of wanting to be in school and learning and experiencing and all of those kinds of things.
That's right. And I was thinking when you were telling a story about your student who wasn't sure about College of Charleston, like, isn't that what we want? That they're going to come home? That really is indicative of the gap years, that students are coming home like they're coming home deeper thinkers. Like, so she's really trying to make sure this was the right fit. So that's the thing I also want parents to focus their attention on, is it's very scary to feel like this is going to disrupt the process, but actually we just see kids coming home, just they're not taking it all for granted. They are thinking much more deeply about these choices. They really understand the implications. And I really admire that so much. I went back and was reading the question, and just to confirm for the family that asked, what if they just decide not to go to college? And I just wanted to be really clear that in my 25 years of this work, I have not had one student not go on to college. So if that was already their intended path. Again, some shifting, as Kim and I have shared, around, is this still the right place for me? Is that the major I want to do? Could be some banter around that, but we've never had that. In fact, most students, frankly, by the end of the year, they've been working really hard on a gap year. They faced some really big stuff. They're actually like, oh, this was big. This was, my mind is stimulated. I've seen things and done things I never thought I would be exposed to. They're really ready to apply that back in a classroom setting. And again, I think that's why we see the higher GPAs and that determination on campus. They're really ready to kind of dive back into their learning. I was just gonna throw another comment in the or link there, and I know that Kim probably has so much advice around how to pursue the deferral process. That's a blog entry I probably wrote a year ago. Very popular one, and so I like to share it with families. That sounds like a daunting process. It's actually not that complicated. And I'm sure Kim's got loads of resources, but I just thought I would drop that in on kind of how to go about the deferral process.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I think, you were touching on students coming back, earning higher GPAs, all of those kinds of things. And I think that it's, sometimes what I think, and this is anecdotal, but that the confidence that they're gaining, like if they're leaving high school, either burnout or just unsure of their own abilities, how ready they are for college, I think the gap year can really help them find that in themselves. And, you learn so much. I think about my almost full year of studying abroad, and just even I was already in college and it wasn't a gap, but it was still such a different experience that my senior year of college was completely different for me after that. And I think it was just that, look what I just did out here in Europe for a year, backpacking around and things like that. And I think students really get that, that boost of confidence that they need at times, and they come back ready to jump in with their peers and feel like they are on par with everyone else.
100%. Kim, where were you on your study abroad year?
So Germany primarily. German was the language I studied, and so spent most of the time in between Frankfurt and Berlin, but then got to just take advantage of being over there. So spent the rest of the summer backpacking around and visited as much of Europe as I could in a short amount of time, living out of my backpack. And so and got to be with 4 of my best friends from college, who are still 4 of my very best friends today. And it was,
of course, they are.
an amazing experience. And so
oh, that's incredible. And I'd imagine, many families and parents are like, well, we didn't have gap years back in our day. And they might have been there, but we weren't really talking about it. But most families did have that, a semester or a year or a road trip. They had some kind of pinnacle experience between the ages of 18 and 21 that probably still elicits this nostalgia and happiness. And that's what we're talking about for our young adults, right? Is kind of that life-changing year when students kind of get to take the reins of their lives, feel independent, absolutely face discomfort and challenge. And it's about developing resiliency. We just were starting to email our current students and reminding them the gap year is a roller coaster. And we have peaks and euphoric moments. We're out looking at a sunset. We're in Hawaii with these new friends. We're so proud of ourselves. It's so gorgeous. And then we have the troughs where I'm at the bottom. I don't know if I can do this for another month. I'm so sick of rice and beans, whatever it is. And the gap year is absolutely about the merging of those two, because when you get through that trough and get back up, whether students are aware of it consciously or becomes more subliminal, there's this affirmation that I can get through this thing. I'm going to rise up again. And I think that it's happening quite a bit on a gap year. Mom and dad aren't there to shepherd it. And so students are developing. That's why resiliency has become such a big word in association with gap year. Students are really learning out of the box, really learning just how capable they are. I'm not sure they always realize that. Um, and so we look back at fondness with those like euphoric memories, and I'm sure there were loads of uncomfortable moments in your year, right? That's
Yes,
not
yes.
what we actually look back on. What we look back on is an incredible sense of success, of relationships that we built, of skills like a language,
Mhm.
and the fact that we did it. It's like a badge of honor, and that's what we're seeing students come home with, and it's in no small part due to those challenges that they work their way through. And I think that resiliency is a skill set they don't even realize they are developing while they're in it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I have, it's sort of a related, maybe unrelated question a little bit, but do you work with students at all who take high school gaps even? Or semesters away or anything like that? And I'm thinking of, I've had a few over the years who've done things like that, but is that
Yeah.
part of your work?
More often, because there's going to be our specialty is the gap year,
Okay,
but we've seen and we work with really, I'd say on average 18 to 30-year-olds, because we work with
okay,
students who have come out of graduate school
yeah,
or who are doing kind of an early career change, and aren't attached yet with a mortgage or a family, so things like that. We definitely, Jason and I really first cut our teeth in this work 25 years ago with high school students, so
okay,
we feel very connected to the field. So I would say more the case of high school summer opportunities we're very versed in, and then kind of the equivalent of study abroad first semester year for high schools, which there are a network of really tremendous schools, again, focused on experiential learning, but fully accredited schools. So a
right,
student wouldn't miss a step. But just taking a pause or a break, those kids can be more difficult just because their age will be a limitation unless they are traveling with parents. And we have done some advising with families who are on sabbatical, finding experiences that are appropriate for a wide age group.
okay, yeah, that helps.
Yeah.
Let me turn back to the audience. Any other questions as we're nearing the end here today?
I'm so curious. I mean, do you recognize the names, Kim's? Do we have seniors here mostly, families of seniors, or
Um,
all ages? Or
I have all ages here.
yeah,
So yes, so really we cover almost the whole gamut of high school,
great.
literally.
That's great.
So that's great. And I think there's value in it at thinking about it at every stage is
Absolutely.
how you're feeling about it. And, we know
Yeah,
minds can change, but keeping an open mind early on, I think helps just considering it as a possibility, at least.
absolutely.
Right.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, so anything else, Jane, that you would add as a sort of a parting shot or anything about
Whew. What else? There's
covered so much? This has been
I
so
think we covered a
informative.
lot. I mean, those are kind of the hot topics we talk about. There's the fears around school and college, and I think we really address that. We talk about finances, and there's just how to get started. I think we're there. I'll just say, I'll say one other thing. I've been thinking about this a lot lately. I know it's so much to take in, and people are very zoomed out. We know this. So, and then I often get the like, I was in a panel the other night, and a parent wrote, how do I lead my horse to the water? Like oftentimes parents like, I know this is a great thing and I can't get my child to the conversation. Very big shift from a decade ago when I think students were charging it and parents were like, no way. There's been a
Right.
huge, I think there's been like a 180 on that. So one way to just like balance the Zoom fatigue and I can't get my kid to engage this is just to start following. I know it sounds like parents maybe not don't want to hear this, but I suggest you follow people on social media. Um, because you still get that flavor. It's just the veneer, obviously. We know it's got some superficiality to it, but I can say, speaking for myself, we do our own social media. We don't have an intern. It's authentic. It's our message. It's our brand. So every day I'm trying to share a report from the field, or a inspiration. I wake up in the middle of the night. Yesterday was all about the roller coaster. Like, wow, how are our kids doing right now in the field? Some are going to be here, some are going to be here. So follow programs that feel intriguing. If you're interested in Judaism and a program in Israel, try and find a few programs and start to follow them on social media. If you're interested in the wilderness, because you'll get similar messaging, and it's a really easy way to start to stay connected to these programs without getting on their email lists. and they'll be every once in a while they're all going to share, here's a free webinar, jump on with our directors, or here's a video from one of our kids in the field, or you're just going to get a lot of information passively without having to really actively put yourself in the face of it yet. This is a great approach for someone who's not a senior. If you're a senior and you're on the precipice, it's time to actually pick up the phone and start getting into some serious phone calls. But for those of you with juniors and younger, just start to kind of see who you like and start to follow. You can always unfollow, but it doesn't commit you to being on a mailing list, which generally does start to get really overwhelming. So I would suggest that. And actually for seniors on that note, I would say that there are, counselors like us that all offer free consultations. So if you want to start to get a bit more into brass tacks, tell your story about your child, and is this a fit? And here are our concerns, or here are our hopes, or here's our budget. Schedule a free consultation with us, or anyone for that matter, just to kind of move that conversation forward, again, specifically for seniors, because it is time to start gathering a bit more information more quickly and starting to make some decisions if this is a path you're going to choose.
Absolutely. Yes, I would say, colleges, once decisions are released here, the final decisions at the end of March, roughly, you'll have until the beginning of May to be making those decisions. And that's the same time of year you'd be requesting the deferral. So it is time to really, you're right, pull all that together for seniors for sure. So, well, this has been, again, as always, so fun and informative, and it makes me, every time we talk, want to get back out there. And can you help a 50-year-old who needs a class here at some point? I think it really is. I wish more families could and would consider it, because I just think the growth potential for the students is so big, and they come back so changed in so many great ways. So I hope that we have given you all some inspiration. Those of you who are here, if you're watching it on the replay, same. And if you are watching it on the replay and you have questions for me or for Jane, please be in touch and we will answer your questions, even if you couldn't be here live, to get them answered. Jane, thanks so much. And
My pleasure.
we'll stay in touch when you're back on the East Coast and things are safe.
We'll
Maybe
come
we
back
can
through
see
New
each
York.
other. Yes,
That'd be great.
That'd be
And
awesome.
I just want to say, Kim, I think Coffee with Kim is brilliant. I love that you do this for your families, and I love that you're out there helping to support gap year. I feel like college advisors are gatekeepers, and if that's not an option you're opening up to families, they don't know it's there, and you're a trusted resource for so many people. So I really love being invited back for this, but just appreciate more than anything as a professional that you're out there really just trying to help demystify this, and let families know that they're fabulous directions on the long haul of their education, and this being one of them. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Absolutely. Well, great. Well, enjoy California for the length of time you're there. To my other attendees, thanks for being here, and we'll all stay in touch.
Sounds great.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.